So good morning, everyone from the European Chemicals Agency, and welcome to this webinar entitled How to Manage Your Biocidal Product Family. My name is Chiara Pecorini. I am working in the Biocidal Products Unit. And today I will open this webinar with some general indications, and I will close it with some concluding remarks. What can you expect from this webinar today? This webinar will be useful for you if you work or you plan to work on an application for product authorization for a biocidal product family. You will learn about the key changes of the revised biocidal product family concept. You will learn how to better manage your biocidal product family. You will receive some examples of practical experience gained so far from a competent authority and from industry. You will also get key messages and tips, and you will be able to ask questions. To ask your questions, please join the question and answers panel at slido.com using the event code BIOCIDES. We will try to address as many questions as we can until 1 p.m. Helsinki time. It is important that you ask questions that concern the material presented today during the webinar. And please also be aware that this will be a public chat, so do not share confidential information. If your question is not answered, you can always contact us via the help desk using the contact form at the link indicated in this slide. The material of this webinar, namely the video recording, the presentations, and the question and answers pairs, will be published on the ECHA webpage webinars, which is visible on your screen. As of the agenda of today, after this introduction, you will hear from Vincent Delvaux from the European Commission, DG Health and Food Safety, who will talk about the state of play on biocidal product families. We will then continue with a presentation from Thilo Walter from the Federal Institute for Occupational Safety and Health in Germany, who will talk about the practical experience gained on the new family concept. And Thilo will share with you also some concrete examples. Then we have Meredith Thielin from Ecolab, who will present the practical experience from the industry side on the new family concept, and she will focus especially on efficacy assessment. Meredith will share with you some considerations, reflections, and also some practical concerns. And then I will wrap up the webinar with some concluding remarks. But let's now start, and I would like to give the floor to the first speaker. Enjoy.
Okay, hello, and welcome to this training on the biocidal product family. I'm Vincent Delvaux. I'm from the Santé E4 unit in DG Health and Food Safety from the European Commission, and this unit is in charge of the biocidal product regulation. So I've been asked to basically introduce the topic of this webinar on the biocidal product family. And I will not enter into too much details, but will mainly focus on horizontal matters. I will first give you an overview of the presentation. Firstly, I will introduce the topic by explaining the scope, the definition of the biocidal product family concept. Then the core of the presentation will be more on the implementation, what has been done so far to try to clarify this concept, which is very lightly described in the text of the regulation. Then I will continue by giving some tips for pre-submission meetings, which seems to be a very important step before the dossier for authorization is submitted to the authorities. Then a few highlights on support that you could find either online or from the National Help Desk. I will give you some figures about the number of authorizations that have been granted so far for biocidal product family under union authorization, and then I will finalize my presentation with some take-home messages mainly addressed to the applicants. Then, yes. Firstly, we can start with the scope. In fact, the biocidal product family concept is a development of the former concept of frame formulation that existed already in the former directive. This concept of biocidal product family was not part really of the regulation in 2012 when it was first adopted, but came afterwards with together with an amendment of the regulation. It was an add-on that came in 2014. And the biocidal product family was indeed the main subject of this amendment to the regulation. So we now have this definition of what is a biocidal product family in Article 3.1s of the regulation. And it says that a biocidal product family means a group of biocidal products having similar use, the same active substance, similar composition, with specified variation, and the same level of risk and efficacy. So it means that products within a BPF, in addition to having a different composition, can be intended for different users, including also different users categories, and also respond to different levels of risk and efficacy. And you see immediately that I highlighted a word, an adjective in red in the definition, and that's the word similar. And all the work that has been done so far in the guidance was to try to clarify as much as possible the term similar or the adjective similar or the non, let's say, similarity. Just to notice here at this stage that it's not enough to fulfill one of the criteria. All the above criteria shall be fulfilled to define a family. That's really important to keep this in mind. Obviously, it seems evident, but okay, that's, I think, also worth mentioning it. So in 2014, we had first, just after the introduction of this concept in the regulation, then a first guidance that was agreed at the CA meeting of November 2014. And the objective of the guidance was to set a frame for how to decide when two or more products can be included in a family. And the guidance already tried to address this point of what has to be considered as similar. But the definition was very broad because the expertise, the experience with the biocidal product family was not that big, so to speak. But as it was expected that we could get also quite important products in one family, the guidance already tried to structure all the information could be shared in the summary of product characteristics. And the guidance clarifies that at least the overall product composition should be clarified at the first level of the SPC. Then the guidance introduced the concept of meta-SPC, meaning that a subgroup of products within the biocidal product family have similar composition within the varied specification, within the wide variation of the biocidal product family. The products in the meta-SPC have also the same use associated with a common set of risk mitigation measures. And finally, the products in the meta-SPC have the same hazard and precautionary statement associated with a common set of first aid, disposal, storage instruction, and as well the same shelf life. And at the end, at the third level, you have a description of the composition of the individual biocidal product. The guidance also makes clear that all products within the biocidal product family are covered with the same authorization. Although at the individual biocidal product level, there is also a need to get, let's say, an authorization number, but then this is only for dissemination and enforcement purposes. And lastly, the guidance also clarified that applicants can notify new products under Article 17.6 of the BPR. It means that when the family is clearly defined, the applicants can add new products to the family, and that's of course one advantage of having a family, because then the procedure, let's say, to notify this add-on to the family is relatively simple, and it's described in Article 7.6 of the BPR, and you don't have to conduct a new risk assessment, let's say, to introduce this new product in the family, because the risk assessment has already been done at the family level. So the next slide will introduce you to the work that has been done after the 2014, after the implementation of the 2014 guidance, up to the new guidance in 2019. And the member states, the competent authority, and ECHA also recognized that there were some deficiencies, some uncertainties with the 2014 guidance, and it was decided to set up a working party to provide the Commission with recommendations to revise the notes. And I will explain which points precisely of the guidance were seen to be revised. So the mandate was received by ECHA in July 2017, and as usual, there were different stakeholders that participated to these important discussions. Of course, member states, but also accredited stakeholders. ECHA participated to all these discussions, and the Commission was also invited to participate to some in some meetings that were organized back to back to coordination group meetings, for example. And the Commission was there as an observer, not as a real member of the group. So that's where we ended with the new guidance. As I said, there were some deficiencies that were identified in the former guidance, and I will now come to the difficulties that were identified with the former guidance. And again, the concept of similarity, as you may have also, let's say, clearly supposed, is that the concept of similarity was not well defined in the previous guidance and needed to be further clarified in line with the experience that was gained between 2014 and 2017. And the application of the former guidance led to various interpretations by applicants, and also the submission of big families with several dozens of meta-SPC, leading to several thousands of products. And basically, the family was so big that the application was not readable at all for the authorities. And of course, also because of these deficiencies and the lack of clarity on how to interpret this term similarity, the whole guidance led to uncertainty in terms of family design and in terms of how to evaluate the application in a harmonized way. So the guidance is now available since, not only available, but also applicable since October 2019, and you can find the text of the guidance if you follow the link, which is highlighted in blue. So let's get in a bit the guidance. Of course, the scope of at least my intention is not to go deeply in the text of the guidance because it will require a full session in itself. And I understand that there are two other speakers that will share with you their experience with the guidance, and they will certainly go deeper in the explanation of the guidance. But let's take, for example, the definition of what is a biocidal product family, and let's try to explain how the guidance has tried to improve, let's say, the understanding of this term. So if you look at this term similar composition, there was, there was first this backbone composition, which is an item that was an element that was introduced in the guidance, and which means that each individual member of the biocidal product family should contain the same ingredients that are essential to formulate all products. And here I would like also to mention that there is a kind of flexibility that is introduced. It's also possible to, and we will see it at a later stage when we will talk about the risk and efficacy assessment, there will be a possibility to introduce other substance, but that should be then strongly justified. So the backbone position is there to really clearly indicate which elements, which ingredients are essential to formulate all the products in the family. To address this specified variation, then the guidance introduced the element of grouping of coformulant. Okay, grouping of coformulant is not an element that is mandatory. It's a possibility to group coformulant to reduce complexity, and it's there. That may be used provided that all the coformulants have the same function, have the same impact on the classification and for the whole formulation, and have the same impact on the level of risk and efficacy of the formulation. As regards the similar use, then the guidance introduced in section 323, you can have a look, a flow chart that explain all this similarity of use should be assessed. Again, also this element in the guidance introduced to clarify a bit the flow chart that I just mentioned. The guidance introduced a matrix tool in the format of an Excel sheet that can be used to quite easily check whether a pair of use is similar or not. Now the matrix tool exists and is available in one of the footnotes of the guidance. And again, some element of flexibility was introduced here at the level of the assessment of similarity, because the guidance provides that it is possible to introduce, for the applicant, it's possible to introduce two pair of use that should not be normally considered as similar. But again, this has to be strongly supported and justified. Then thirdly, the similarity of the level of risk and efficacy. That's, of course, the most difficult part of the evaluation. I will not enter into the details here, but you may also find from justified, I would say, that a significant portion of the BPF needs to be covered by the core assessment. But even that, here again, there is some element of flexibility that was granted, mainly to ensure that there will be a need to split each and every biocidal product family that will be applied for. And again, here the guidance introduce a subset refinement, for example, for a different level of risk and or efficacy, and even an extension of the core, a possibility to conduct a risk assessment outside the core assessment for a more demanding use, for example, for outdoor use, when a substance of concern for human health would be required for this harsher use condition. And I make this directly a link to what I said before for the backbone composition, when I said that it's possible sometime to introduce other ingredients other than the ones that were mentioned in the backbone composition. But then here it's in the context of an extension of the core. So that's all for the assessment of the similarity of component of the biocidal product family. But on top of that, the guidance also introduced best practice in pre-submission meetings. I will come to that in my next slide. And also the guidance addressed the splitting of families, what to do when we have to split the family. Will there be some problems for the timelines? What about the Article 89 provision, the fees, the IT system? All that is explained in the guidance. And again, the guidance also provides some clarification about the post-authorization of new products. Now, regarding the tips for the pre-submission meetings, this is very important, and we really strongly request or advise the applicants to seek the support of a competent authority as soon as possible. And when they get the agreement of the competent authority to sign, let's say the agreement at least 1 year before the expected submission. And between the first let's say the first request and the final signature of the agreement, then you should organize meetings, maybe in the plural. You may need several meetings during the year before the submission to help the competent authority to understand your application and to allow them to guide you in the additional question that they may have. You can find all relevant points to be discussed at the pre-submission meeting in Annex 1 to the guidance, but it's not an exhaustive list. There may be other requirements that may be added by the authority. Then in terms of support, of course, the guidance provides a lot of examples. You should seek support also from the National Help Desk. You could also hire a private consultancy or run or be associated with other applicants to form a consortium, for example. You could look on YouTube. Last year, during the biocidal day, some colleagues in ECHA presented interesting information on the biocidal product family. And I also suggest you to visit the ECHA website on supporting document, where you could find an overview of the BPF, which is an Excel sheet which show you how the biocidal product family should be presented in the application dossier. Then just to finish, a few figures on union authorization. So far, we have granted 16 union authorization for biocidal product family. That includes a bit more than 100 products. And so far, 13 member states are involved in union authorization, not only for biocidal product family, but also for single product authorization. And last slide, as I promised, a take-home message, mainly addressed to stakeholders and applicants. So be fully responsible for the content and quality of the dossier. Arrange a pre-submission meeting with the authority as soon as possible. Keep the science of your product family manageable so that the authority can understand what you are doing and what you are looking for, present in an appropriate way the use applied for, and provide robust explanation for the deviations to the general principle of the guidance. I refer here basically to the subset and extension requirements, refinements, sorry. All that, of course, to ensure that your application is processed in a smooth manner, and that yes, we can authorize. I mean, the authorities in general can authorize the product or by the family within the time constraints of the biocidal product regulation. Please have a look also at the Annex 8 of the guidance, which provides a Q&A, mainly to clarify some of the points that were not sufficiently detailed in the guidance. We do not intend to include any details, any technical details on specific dossier in the Q&A. That's not the place. Maybe you could gather. You could request, let's say, in the CG to gather this kind of information that may be useful, but it's not the place, I think, to for the Q&A in the guidance to address this point of clarification. Then, last possibility is to consult the ECHA webpage on the BPF, biocidal product family, where you could find, I think, useful information. So that was it. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that this information was useful to you. And I look forward to hearing from you next week, or no, in 2 weeks. Sorry, in 2 weeks at the webinar itself, because this presentation was pre-recorded. See you. Bye bye. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear stakeholders, welcome everybody from Dortmund, Germany. My name is Thilo Walter. Since 11 years, I work for the German CA in the group responsible for product authorization. And I was a member of the Biocidal Product Working Party. The BPF definition in the BPR is pretty vague, and similarity is not defined in the legal text. That's why guidance documents were developed. The first BPF concept was silent on similarity, but introduced the meta-SPC concept. This led to the not helpful approach to just add more and more products in more and more meta-SPCs, which led to unmanageable applications. This was the reason for the coordination group to give a mandate to a working party, which developed the new BPF concept. The purpose of the BPF concept is to define similarity, and thereby, on the one hand, to ensure a manageable size, while on the other hand, to avoid redundant applications. The BPF definition and concept are, of course, interconnected. Similarity of uses is defined by what is known as the matrix. Similarity of composition is defined by the backbone. Grouping allows to define more precisely what variations are foreseen. Similar levels of risk and efficacy are addressed by one consistent set of RMMs per use and one worst-case composition. Today, I am not going to give advice on how to best manage the iterative process of BPF development. Today, I am going to inform on the issues we have gained experience so far, which are backbone, grouping, matrix, splitting, number of meta-SPCs, unclear key elements, and worst-case composition. In our experience, the backbone concept proved as useful. On the one hand, we accept that 90% of the family applications will pass the test. On the other hand, completely arbitrary combinations of products are no longer possible. And this leads to more manageable applications. However, in order to avoid redundant applications before splitting, sometimes a second look must be taken. The example on my next slide shows that the BPF concept allows for enough flexibility. I'm not going through all the details on the slide. You can take a detailed look at the slide afterwards. Just imagine an application with different powders and suspensions. Both powders lack the water essential for the formulation of the suspensions. At first glance, this seems to be an easy case. 2 powders to be presented in one family and 2 suspensions in another family. But taking a second look, it becomes apparent that the missing water is added to the wettable powder upon mixing and loading. The wettable powder can be seen as a dry concentrate of a suspension. Even more important, after mixing and loading, the wettable powder is used just like the suspensions and therefore, in my example, could be covered by one worst-case composition, one core assessment. Regarding grouping, our experience is limited until today. Frankly speaking, we have made the experience that not the backbone, but all the bones and meat attached to it create the challenge. The experience we have made so far is mixed, because industry chooses very different levels of complexity. On the one hand, if the family is very simple anyway, grouping adds hardly any complexity. Imagine 75% active substance, something around 25% of water, and some PPDs. On the other hand, if the family is very complex anyway, grouping adds hardly any clarity. Imagine 85 ingredients, 9 groups, with up to 47 grouped ingredients. In our experience, those complex applications are not manageable for industry. In our experience, information provided in such complex applications is always contradictory. Information in safety data sheet, Euclid, draft product assessment, and overview tables is never in line, and many of the 180 days foreseen for requests is used up already before the assessment itself starts. Such applications are supposed to fail. Also, regarding the matrix, our experience is limited until today. This is mainly because most applications which are currently on our desks were submitted before the new concept was agreed. Accordingly, no justifications were provided by the applicants why this and that use pattern should be similar. Currently, we can only look which use patterns are included in the families. The experience we have made so far is that a lot will depend on the justifications provided by the applicants. The example on my slide shows that one application, depending on the justifications provided, might need to be split in something between 5 and 15 applications. We have already made some experience regarding the splitting of unmanageable families. In theory, this splitting is as simple as cutting a pizza in 4 pieces. But in our experience, in practice, it is not as easy as foreseen. In practice, there is not only splitting. Before submission of an additional application, there are modifications. Imagine a family pizza, a carefully agreed compromise. But as soon as the restriction by the other family members falls, you of course modify your order. Therefore, updated Euclid dossiers are necessary. In my example, 3 for the new applications, as well as 1 updated dossier for the original application. From our point of view, preferably even 4 new applications in R4BP are needed in order to have a clear picture in R4BP. We do not know how industry is otherwise supposed to manage all the references for mutual recognition and back-to-back applications. My next slides are about impressions we received when dealing with family applications lately. The BPF concept is clear on the number of meter SPCs which is acceptable. 1 meter SPC, unless there is reason, like different hazard phrases or formulation types, provided that the meter SPCs can be covered by 1 assessment. Applicants need to understand the following. The number of meter SPCs only increases the complexity. And no matter in how many meter SPCs the products and uses are presented, the assessment by the MSCA is always the same. With this slide, I intend to clarify an important basic principle behind the new family concept. As a first step, the MSCA checks if the family similarity criteria are fulfilled. Do all the products share the same active substances? Is there a backbone? How looks the matrix? If the application passes the test, the assessment starts. With a reverse conclusion. As the products are similar, they can be covered by 1 core assessment based on 1 worst-case composition. Taking into account different compositions or assessing subgroups of products is not foreseen within the core assessment. Contrary to this, industry sometimes still suggests to have separate assessments. In my example, the reason behind is that the product used for foaming, use 1, is different from the other products within the family. And therefore, the applicant wants the CA to not take the substance of concern, the foaming agent, into account for spraying. But this approach and assumption are wrong. The MSCA will assess each use based on 1 worst-case composition. The question to be answered is, are use 1, 2, and 3 safe with 9% active substance and substance of concern, no matter whether the foaming agent is necessary for spraying or not? Only parameters like application rate, user category, or use area are taken from the SPC for each use. Also, regarding the worst-case composition, until today, our experience is limited. This is mainly because most applications, which are currently on our desks, were submitted before the new concept was agreed. First, we thought every ingredient has to be taken into account for the worst-case composition, and that the worst-case composition must sum up to 100%. Contrary to this, some applicants thought that only active substances and substances of concern must be considered. The truth is somewhere in between. In our experiences, active substances and substances of concern, but for example also substances having an impact on dermal absorption, entry into the environment like binders, or increasing the effect of the active substance, synergists, must be taken into account. Regarding the splitting, we have gained some practical experience already. 3 times splitting of 2 large families was already necessary. The first family, with too many meta species and ingredients was split into 2 families. However, the second new family is almost as unmanageable as the initial family, as the variations in composition are too large. The second family, with too many use patterns, was split into 2 families and 1 single product. The product types were divided between the 2 families, and the applicant took advantage that single products are not restricted by similarity of uses. The third family, with too many use patterns and meta species, was again split into 1 single product and 2 families. To our surprise, here all concentrates were presented in 1 family, while all ready-to-use products were presented in a second family. Concerning the BPF concept, I would like to conclude that it proved useful so far, that the criteria lead to more manageable applications, that redundant applications can be avoided. However, we see the need to gain more experience and then need to develop points like worst-case composition, grouping, and splitting further. Concerning the manageability, I would like to conclude that too many use patterns, or in particular, too many ingredients, grouped or not, still lead to unmanageable applications. Unmanageable for industry and CA alike. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm going to be presenting to you a little bit around some practical experience with the new BPF concept on behalf of industry. The focus is mainly going to be on efficacy, but I'm also going to take you through some general comments on some feedback from overall industry around the overall approach. Then I'll get into a couple of practical concerns about defining that worst case product for efficacy purposes for the BPF. So the agenda today, like I said, mainly around the efficacy experience. First slide will be a bit about the overall industry experience on the BPF, and moving into the current status of the efficacy discussions. Then we'll move into the workload impact, some application coverage and concepts around potential for overdosing, and then a few practical impacts and solutions. Okay, so with that, we'll get started on the overall industry experience. So as many of you know the background, the new family concept went into effect on the 1st of October, 2019. And the applicability of that is that it applies to new submissions after that activation date. And for those that went in before, so applications that were submitted before, it would be if the applicant agrees to apply that new family concept to what was already submitted. So some of the concerns here from industry on this are that the new applications are perfectly fine. That's something that's being worked on. They're looking at redefining the compositions, looking at what that backbone composition will be. But on those already previously submitted dossiers in the evaluation phase, there's some questions that have come in from industry around how to handle that concept for large families that have already been submitted prior to that applicability date. And if that applicant doesn't agree to applying the new concept onto their family that was already submitted, how can the applicants and the authorities best reach a pragmatic approach that will work for everyone? And so there is a bit of a challenge ahead of us, because we need to understand that if that backbone composition is applied, there will be a lack of data when it comes to phys-chem data and efficacy data, and the bridging testing that will need to occur in that new concept. So that could be a big gap. It could be a giant stop the clock, which might exceed the availability of what's there for stop the clock, leading to a non-approval of those dossiers. And there might be also right now what's happening, a lack of official guidance. So that's something that applicants are waiting on. So in the face of no guidance yet, how would you then apply to an already submitted dossier? So this has kind of led industry to, for a presentation like today, it gives us the position of limited availability of feedback from industry right now because there's very little experience with it so far. I think some of the authorities are just now getting to the point where they're looking at the dossiers and starting to apply the new concept, and then reaching out to applicants to see if they want to apply them. So I think those are parts where we're at right now that are just starting the discussion. So we're still a little too early on to be able to provide full guidance. And then what's the most pragmatic approach that's going to suit everyone? That's something that I think needs to be talked about openly. Okay. So moving on, a little bit on the current status for efficacy. So at the end of 2019, there were discussions within the BPC efficacy working group, started to develop a proposal for determining a worst case test product for efficacy for that disinfectant within the BPF. And this was authored by Germany. And the intention of the proposal is to help solve issues currently identified during the BPF evaluation. So these mega large family structures that have been submitted, how can we make that more rapid in terms of going through regulation, because we're seeing massive delays, which is fully understood. And how to help apply that new family concept regarding a worst case formulation. So it's both a solution and a way to determine what then would be this worst case formulation. So this is something we've been talking about. We've been having these discussions within the efficacy working group of the BPC. And while industry fully understands the proposed approach and the proposed approach that's been put forth in the new BPF concept, we're concerned that there are some implications to employing such an approach. So while the authority's assessment will be reduced, we're afraid that this could lead potentially to a high impact of the workload for industry. And additionally, the kind of trickle down effect towards contract labs that are available to do those studies. So that this will, and I'll get to that in the next slide, but this will have a large impact on the workload. There is a high potential for overdosing in the new approach. There's severe limitations to the size of the family structures that could be usable for industry in the end. Has a large impact on the variability of products that are available on the European market, which could then further reduce and shrink the market size in terms of the diversity of product available. And it could lead to an impact for industry to need to submit more single product dossiers, thus increasing the workload overall because we'll have more dossiers instead of just more components within a dossier. So a bit more on the workload impact. So in the new family structure, this is a proposal coming from BAWA on the approach to help explain this, which is very useful. But in the old approach, you would have the components listed, the active substance, the surfactant, your thickening systems. And you would be looking at your active substance level. So we're looking at the lowest amount, which would be your worst case. And then your higher components of those that positively impact the efficacy of the overall product. So whereas before we would need to submit individual data sets on all of the products within the family, the proposal now would be to set up bridging studies to define those worst case, both the min and the max. And out of that, you would then come to your lowest amount of active for your min and your lowest amount of active plus your highest amount of the positively contributing coformulants, in this case, the thickening system, as the example. So your min and your max, right? Your min, your max. And so this would then be defined as your worst case. And so again, to kind of reiterate, we understand that this reduces the amount of workload for authorities. However, for transitional regulations within all the countries, as we move through BPD into BPR, we are still required to submit all of these individual test data sets for each of the products. So while you'll be submitting data for each of the individual products, so you'll be submitting the full set of studies for these, all of the efficacy components here, so depending upon what you're claiming. Under the new concept, you'll need to then do the min and the max, which requires these bridging studies. And then additionally, the full data set based upon these. So this would almost double the workload for industry to be compliant with the new family concept. This has large capacity, again, on the ability of contract labs to deliver this, especially in this time with the corona crisis. And it could result in long wait times, which, again, impacts that stop the clock risk. Okay. So we talk a little bit about application coverage and overdosing. As we currently understand the proposal coming from the German authority, you would then have your worst case test product defined with the lowest amount of active substance. And this would apply to all the uses that you've defined within the same product family. So every use will be assessed with the worst case test product. So the full battery of tests for efficacy, bacteria, yeast, viruses would all be conducted using the same worst case product for every single use that's present within your biocidal product family. And here, there are some concerns because this might render the concept completely useless for many applicants in terms of doing the family because of the complexity of the different types of uses. Now, you could even have within the same use, so if we talk about a PT2 use for surface disinfection, you could have the same product being used for multiple uses. So if we're talking about a detergent disinfectant versus a terminal disinfection. And so for that terminal disinfection endpoint, you could be structurally overdosing the product in those applications. There's also been discussion around use of dummy products. So when you're looking at these min and max values, I'll go back one slide. So this would be a product that you would be creating that would be not one that you market. So this would have thickening systems, so both thickening systems at their max value. So this would be creating a dummy product here in this instance. So when you create those types of dummy products, you create a worst case that's not representative of something that you're actually marketing and selling, which is not representative of the application in realistic conditions. And it could prove that that product in the end, that dummy product, isn't stable. So that's another concern coming from industry here is the creation of kind of super dummy formulas that aren't realistic of application in practice, which might lead to a situation where you've created products that are completely unrealistic for an actual application and use. This is a huge concern coming from industry as well when we look at this new concept. So I want to walk into a little bit practical impact and solutions. And so within this family concept, I've discussed a couple of concepts, but just in summary, the impact. The family concept could become very narrow, forcing companies to produce more biocidal dossiers, which then in the end increases the workload for all, both authorities and industry. The use of these dummy products, as I just went over, could create these kind of super formulas, which are excessively difficult to pass against, and they create unrealistic restrictions on dosing values. This might lead to overdosing. This might also lead to further issues with risk assessments. So it's a huge concern as well. The family size restrictions may lead industry to largely reduce the variability of disinfectants available in the market, as I mentioned earlier. And the cost burden for smaller companies to comply with this might render them unable to actually enter the market and compete. So that's something we want to make sure that we keep open, the availability to participate in the process of making disinfectant products. So a couple of solutions from the industry side, some thoughts to consider. Would be to potentially allow within the building of this worst case assessment, looking at existing formulas within the family to allow for realistic formulations. So not actually creating these kind of super dummy formulas, rather basing the worst case off an existing formulation to the best of the ability of the applicant in consideration and discussion with the competent authority. Perhaps there could be a subset of different concentration levels within the min and the max active substance concentration ranges that could allow for multiple worst case formulations on a case by case basis. Again, in consultation with the competent authority as needed, e-consultations, etc. And allowing also for product specific claims. So actually still allowing to make those specific claims for the products with their actual usage concentration, not necessarily needing review by the authorities because they would then fit under the the highest level of the active substance. So they would be underneath, so they would be a lower level of active substance, and include an easier to test against lower tiered organisms. So if you're not doing a tiered organism in terms of the structure, you're not moving from a envelope virus and then claiming a non-envelope virus, as that data might not have been assessed by the authority, but rather looking at the envelope virus under the umbrella of the non-envelope virus as an example. So just some thoughts to consider, some feedback from industry on the BPF concept. Unfortunately, it's a little early for us to give full feedback, but I hope that some of this feedback could be taken into consideration and helpful to potential applicants and authorities alike. Thank you.
Good morning again, everyone, and welcome back. I hope that you found the presentations from the speakers useful, and you also got tips for your application for a product authorization for a family. From my side, I would like to wrap up this webinar with some concluding remarks. First of all, I would like to invite you to consult our product family page on the ECHA website, where you can find information on product families and also on the notification of new products in a family. As Vincent mentioned in his presentation, it is very important that you look for a competent authority as soon as possible. I'm talking about a reference member state for national authorization or the evaluating competent authority for a union authorization. And also it is very important that you arrange a pre-submission meeting during the year before the submission. During this meeting, you will get the occasion to discuss the structure of the family with the competent authority and also to clarify issues regarding the family structure itself. As you have heard from Thilo and Meredith, the experience gained so far on the family concept from both competent authorities and industry is still limited. This is understandable because the revised product family concept has become applicable since 1 year only. So more time is needed to get familiar with the new concept. Nonetheless, it is possible to derive some take-home messages on the best practice to build and defend your product family. When you design your product family, you should keep in mind the concept of similarity. And to do so, the tip is to keep it simple. So reduce the number of metaspecies in order to reduce complexity. The more your family is complex, the more difficult it is to assess it. Also limit the number of use patterns and variations in compositions to keep your family size manageable. And this is a compromise to avoid redundancy and allow enough flexibility. Consider one core assessment for each use based on a worst-case composition. And remember that the identification and justification of the one worst-case composition is within your responsibility. I would also like to remind you about some documents that concern product families. For example, the first one is the document that Meredith mentioned in her presentation. It's about the harmonized approach to determine a worst case or representative test product for a disinfectant biocidal product family. It has been prepared by the German competent authority and has been already discussed at the efficacy working group. The document will be presented at the Biocidal Products Committee for endorsement. In addition, be aware that we are in the process of revising the product assessment report template and the supporting document overview of the biocidal product family to reflect the new elements of the family concept. Both documents will be published on the ECHA website once they are ready. In this slide, I have indicated some links that I think may be useful for you. The first one is the link to the Note for Guidance document. I included the link to the product family page on our website, as well as the biocide submission manuals and supporting documents links. So this is it from my side. I would like to thank you all for attending this webinar, and I also would like to remind you that we will continue answering your questions until 1 p.m. Helsinki time. So have a nice continuation of the day, and most importantly, stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.